I never thought a cheap plastic baby monitor would crack open 20 years of silence between me and my father. One minute, I was storming out, slamming the front door so hard the frame rattled. The next, I was sitting in my parked SUV down the street, earbuds in heart hammering like I was back in a combat zone. What I heard next wasn't the quiet cooing of my 8-month-old daughter. It was my father's voice, low, broken, and full of words I had waited my whole life to hear. Words that made me question everything I thought I knew about the man who raised me. The late afternoon light filtered through the kitchen curtains of my modest 2-story house on the edge of Fort Bragg, casting long shadows across the worn oak table. I stood there in my faded army sweatshirt, bouncing little Sophie on my hip, while she fussed and grabbed at my dog tags. 2 weeks of leave. That was all I had asked for, just enough time to catch my breath after months of back-to-back assignments. But then, the regular sitter called in sick with the flu, and suddenly my carefully planned recovery turned into a desperate scramble. "Dad, I wouldn't ask if I had any other choice," I said into the phone, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. Frank Sullivan's reply came after a long pause, the way it always did. "Well, Erica, if you're that busy playing soldier, maybe you should have thought twice before having a baby on your own." His words landed like a slap, even though I'd heard variations of them for years. No warmth, no, "Of course I'll help." Just that familiar edge of disapproval. I closed my eyes and swallowed the lump in my throat. At 38, I was a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army, responsible for hundreds of soldiers' deployments to some of the worst places on Earth, and more medals than I cared to count. But standing in my own kitchen with my father on the line, I still felt like that stubborn 20-year-old who had packed her bags and left home against his wishes. He arrived the next morning in his old blue pickup truck, the one with the dent in the fender from some long-ago fender bender he refused to fix. At 68, Frank Sullivan still carried himself like the mechanic who could tear down an engine blindfolded. Broad shoulders, calloused hands, silver haircut, military short, even though he'd been out of the game for decades. He wore his usual flannel shirt and work boots, smelling faintly of motor oil and coffee. "Hi, Dad," I said, stepping aside to let him in. He nodded, once eyes flicking past me to Sophie, who was sitting in her high chair chewing on a teething ring. She's gotten bigger. That was it. No hug, no smile for his only granddaughter, just a simple observation. The first few days were tense but manageable. I tried to keep things light, showing him where the formula was, how Sophie liked to be rocked before naps, which blankets were her favorites. He listened without comment, then went about his business in that quiet, methodical way of his. But something felt off. He would hold Sophie for long stretches, just staring at her tiny face, his expression unreadable. Sometimes I'd catch him in the nursery, standing by the window, turning over an old photo of Mom in his hands. The moment I walked in, the photo disappeared into his pocket, and he'd start talking about the weather or the leaky faucet in the bathroom. At night, after I'd gone upstairs, I heard him whispering to Sophie. Soft murmurs I couldn't quite make out. The first time it happened, I paused on the landing, heart tightening. But whenever I entered the room, he went silent, busying himself with folding a blanket or checking the baby monitor on the dresser. By day 4, the suspicion had settled deep in my chest like a stone. This wasn't the grumpy but predictable father I'd known. This was something else, something guarded, almost secretive. The man who had spent 2 decades making me feel like my choices were never good enough suddenly seemed fragile. It scared me more than any battlefield ever had. That morning I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know what was going on when I wasn't in the room. Sophie had just gone down for her nap after a bottle, her little chest rising and falling peacefully in the crib. I grabbed my keys and made a show of it. "I'm heading out to the store for groceries," I announced from the hallway, loud enough for him to hear in the living room. "Should be back in about an hour." "You good?" "Yeah," came his gruff reply. "We'll be fine." I yanked the front door open and slammed it shut with enough force to rattle the pictures on the wall. Then, instead of getting in my car and driving away, I slipped quietly down the side path, climbed into the driver's seat of my SUV parked at the curb, and locked the doors. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone and opened the baby monitor app, the one connected to the camera and microphone in Sophie's nursery. I slipped in my earbuds, adjusted the volume, and waited. The house was quiet at first. Just the soft hum of the air conditioner and Sophie's occasional sleepy sigh. I stared at the live feed on my screen, the familiar crib, the changing table, the old wooden rocking chair my father had insisted on bringing from his house. Minutes ticked by. My stomach twisted with guilt and curiosity. This was wrong, spying on my own father. But the whispers, the hidden photos, the way he shut down every time I appeared, it had been eating at me for days. Then I heard it. The creak of the rocking chair. Frank's heavy footsteps crossing the nursery floor. He settled into the chair with a low sigh that carried through the monitor like static. "All right, little one," he murmured, his voice so gentle it didn't sound like him at all. "Your mama's gone for a bit. Just you and me now." My breath caught. I leaned forward in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel. He started humming an old tune Mom used to sing when I was small. Then the words came slow and rough, like they'd been buried for years. I started suspecting my own father, and I never imagined it would lead me here. The monitor crackled softly as he shifted, probably adjusting Sophie in his arms. The rocking chair creaked in a slow, steady rhythm through my earbuds. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, the afternoon sun warming the steering wheel beneath my palms, while my heart pounded against my ribs. Dad's voice, usually so clipped and rough, had softened into something I barely recognized. It wrapped around me like an old blanket I thought had been thrown away years ago. "Mama's gone for a bit, Sophie girl," he whispered. "Just us now. You don't know how lucky you are having a mama like yours. Strong. So damn strong." I waited for the familiar sting, the criticism that always followed any mention of my career. It didn't come. Instead, he let out a long, tired breath. "But she never listens to her old man. Never has. Thinks she's got to carry the whole world on her shoulders. Thinks she doesn't need anybody." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Tears blurred my vision. I pressed a hand to my mouth to keep from making a sound, even though I was alone in the car. There it is, I thought. The same old story. All these years, and he still saw me as the stubborn daughter who had chosen the army over family, who had left him behind. "She's convinced herself she's made of steel," he continued, his voice dropping even lower. "Doesn't let anybody close. Not really. After her husband passed, God, that was hard. But she just squared her shoulders and kept marching, like always." Sophie made a small, contented noise. Dad chuckled softly, the sound so rare it made my chest ache. "Yeah, you like that, don't you? Hearing about your tough mama." But she wasn't always like this. Used to be a little girl who'd crawl into my lap after I came home from the shop, grease still on my hands, asking me to read her the same story every night. I remembered those nights. The smell of machine oil and aftershave. The way his voice would rumble through his chest as he read. But that was before Mom got sick. Before everything changed. His tone shifted again, heavier now. I watched her the day she shipped out for basic training. Stood at the window for hours after her bus left. Your grandma, God rest her soul, was already gone by then. Cancer took her fast. Erica never let herself grieve proper. Just packed her bags and said she was going to make something of herself. Prove everybody wrong. I wiped my eyes angrily. Prove everybody wrong. Meaning prove him wrong. That's how I'd always interpreted it. The monitor picked up the sound of him standing, pacing slowly with Sophie. His boots made soft thuds on the nursery rug. I drove all the way to her graduation, 14 hours straight. Sat in the back row so she wouldn't see me. When they called her name, Lieutenant Erica Sullivan, I cried like a damn baby. But I left before she came off that stage. Didn't want her to see her old man falling apart. Figured if she saw me weak, she might think it was okay to be weak too. And she couldn't afford that. Not in the world she chose. My breath hitched. Graduation day. I had scanned the crowd desperately, hoping against hope he'd show up. When I didn't see him, I told myself it was confirmation he didn't care. He never had. But now... "I was there when she got her first promotion too," he went on. "And the second. Sent her a card once. Just signed it Dad. Never wrote more. What was I supposed to say? Proud of you. She already knew I thought the army was stealing her life. At least, that's what I let her believe. The confusion hit me like a wave. This wasn't the narrative I had carried for 20 years. The one where my father resented my uniform, resented my ambition, resented every mile I put between us. The rocking started again. His voice grew thick. After her mama died, the doctors told me my heart was giving out. Said I might have a few years if I was lucky. I wasn't gonna tie that strong-willed girl down. Not when she had the whole world waiting. So I pushed, made myself cold. Told her the military would break her. Told her she was too hard, too closed off. Figured if she believed I didn't need her, she'd fly. Tears streamed down my face now. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The baby monitor app showed him sitting again, Sophie nestled against his chest. His large hand gently patted her back. Should have told her the truth. Should have said I was scared. Scared of leaving her alone. Scared she'd blame herself if I went while she was gone. But I didn't. And now look at us. Two stubborn fools dancing around the same hurt for 20 years. He fell quiet for a long moment. Only the gentle creak of the chair and Sophie's soft breathing filled the audio. I sat there in the car, the world outside feeling distant and unreal. The man I thought had never been proud of me had been standing in the shadows of every milestone crying where I couldn't see. I didn't know whether to feel relief or anger or a deep shattering sadness for all the lost time. Maybe all three at once. Dad's voice came again barely above a whisper. Your mama's coming back soon, little one. When she does, I don't know if I'll have the courage to say any of this to her face. Some things are easier to tell a baby who can't talk back. I reached for the ignition, ready to go inside and confront him, but something held me back. There was more. I could feel it in the heavy silence that followed. The monitor crackled as he moved toward the dresser. I heard the soft slide of a drawer opening. The drawer slid open with a faint wooden groan that came through clearly over the baby monitor. I remained glued to the driver's seat, my SUV still parked 2 houses down, engine off. The afternoon light had shifted, throwing long shadows across the dashboard. My cheeks were wet, but I didn't bother wiping them anymore. Every word from my father's mouth was rewriting the story I had told myself for 2 decades. I kept every single one, Sophie, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Didn't throw away a single letter your mama sent me from those godforsaken places. There was the rustle of paper-thick envelopes, I imagined the kind the army issued with the official return address. I remembered writing those letters on whatever surface I could find, the back of a Humvee in Afghanistan, a cramped bunk in Germany, a dusty tent in Korea. They were usually short, practical updates. I'm okay. Training is intense. Miss you both. I never poured my heart out. Not to a man I believed didn't want to hear it. He settled back into the rocking chair, the old wood protesting under his weight. First one came from basic training. She was so excited. Told me about the obstacle course, how she beat half the boys. I read that letter so many times the paper started to tear at the folds. I closed my eyes, picturing him alone in the old house after Mom passed, sitting at the kitchen table with my words spread out under the lamplight. The image hurt more than I expected. Every deployment, every new base, I got them all. Afghanistan, Iraq, those cold nights in Korea. She'd write about the sandstorms, the heat, the friends she lost. Never complained, just kept going. I'd sit there with my bad heart ticking like a faulty engine and read them until I had them memorized. His voice cracked. Doctors gave me 6 months, maybe a year after your grandma died. Congestive heart failure. Said the stress would finish me off quick. I looked at my girl already packing her bags, and I made a choice. I'd be the mean old bastard she needed me to be. Push her away so she wouldn't feel guilty, flying off to save the world while her old man fell apart back home. The confession landed heavily. All those arguments. All the times he criticized my uniforms, my short hair, my decision not to settle down. They weren't rejection. They were protection. A clumsy, heartbreaking shield. I told her the army was stealing her youth. Told her she was too hard, too independent. Anything to make her believe I didn't need her close. If she thought I was disappointed, maybe she wouldn't rush home every time I caught a cold. Maybe she'd build her own life without looking over her shoulder for a dying father. Sophie fussed softly. Dad shushed her with surprising tenderness, the sound of his hand patting her back, steady and rhythmic. Worked too well, I guess. She stopped calling as much. Visits got shorter. Every time she walked out that door, I'd go straight to this drawer and pull out the letters. Read them again. Sometimes I'd write back, long ones, pages and pages, started every single one the same way. He paused. I could hear him swallowing hard. Dear Erica, I'm proud of you. The words I had waited my entire adult life to hear. Spoken not to me, but to my sleeping daughter. My shoulders shook with silent sobs. The car suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. I wrote over 30 letters, he continued. Never sent a one. What if she saw how scared I was? What if knowing the truth made her come running back and resent me for it later? Better she think I was just a stubborn old fool who never approved. At least then she'd keep moving forward. I heard the rustle of paper again as he apparently pulled one out. His voice grew distant for a moment, like he was reading to himself. You don't know how much it means to know you're out there making a difference. Your mother would be so proud. I wish I could tell you in person, but I'm just an old mechanic who never learned the right words. Tears slipped down my neck and into the collar of my shirt. 20 years. 2 decades of believing I was never enough for him. Of carrying the weight of his imagined disapproval through every promotion ceremony, every deployment, every lonely night in a foreign country. All because he loved me too much to hold me back. The monitor picked up the soft click of him closing the box, then the chair rocking once more. After she lost Michael in that training accident, I wanted to drive up there so bad, hold her while she cried. But I stayed away, sent flowers with a card that just said sorry. Figured she didn't need her broken-down father adding to her pain. She had to be strong for that little girl she was carrying. Sophie let out a small sigh in her sleep. Dad's voice softened further. Now here you are, sweet girl. Proof that life keeps going even when we mess it up. I don't have much time left, heart's getting tired again. But I'm glad I got to hold you. Glad I got to tell somebody the truth before it's too late. I couldn't stay in the car any longer. My hand was on the door handle before I even realized I'd moved. The weight of everything I'd just heard pressed down on me, but beneath the shock and sorrow there was something else. Something warm and fragile, and desperately needed. Understanding. Dad's final words drifted through the earbuds as I stepped out onto the sidewalk. I love you, Erica. Always have. Just never knew how to say it without breaking you. My legs felt unsteady as I walked up the familiar front path. The key was still in my pocket, but I didn't need it. I pushed the door open quietly, the hinges giving a soft protest. The house smelled like coffee and baby powder, the ordinary sense of a life I had been trying so hard to balance. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure he would hear it from upstairs. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step deliberate. The nursery door was slightly ajar. Through the gap I could see my father's broad back in the rocking chair Sophie cradled safely against his chest. The baby monitor on the dresser glowed with its green light still transmitting. He hadn't noticed I'd returned. For a moment I just stood there watching this man I thought I knew. His head was bowed over his granddaughter, one large hand supporting her tiny body. The box of letters sat open on the changing table beside him. I stepped inside. The floorboard creaked under my boot. Frank's head snapped up. His eyes widened when he saw me standing in the doorway, cheeks streaked with tears, earbuds still dangling from my neck. The color drained from his face as realization hit. Erica, his voice was hoarse. You weren't at the store. I shook my head, unable to speak at first. The baby monitor was still on. My own recorded voice from earlier instructions to him played faintly in the background before going silent. Everything was out in the open now. I heard you, Dad, I whispered finally. All of it. He looked down at Sophie, then back at me. For the first time in my memory, my father looked truly old, vulnerable in a way that made my chest tighten painfully. His shoulders slumped. The tough mechanic who never backed down from anything seemed to shrink right there in the rocking chair. I didn't want you to know he said the words rough. Didn't want you carrying my mess on top of everything else you've already carried. I crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to my knees in front of the chair. Up close, I could see the tremble in his hands, the moisture gathering in the corners of his eyes. 20 years of distance melted away in that single moment. Without thinking, I wrapped my arms around him, around both of them. My forehead pressed against his shoulder, the flannel shirt soft and familiar beneath my cheek. He stiffened at first, the way he always did with affection, but then his free arm came around me. Strong, hesitant, real. We stayed like that for a long time. Sophie slept peacefully between us while father and daughter cried together for the first time since I was a little girl. His body shook with silent sobs. I felt the dampness of his tears against my hair. "I'm so sorry, kiddo," he murmured into my hair. "So damn sorry. I thought I was doing right by you. Thought pushing you away would set you free. I thought you were ashamed of me," I choked out. "All this time, every promotion, every time I came home in uniform. I was waiting for you to say something, anything that showed you were proud." He pulled back just enough to look at me. His eyes, blue like mine, were red-rimmed and full of regret. I was proud. So proud it hurt. Still am. "You're the best thing I ever had a hand in, Erica. The strongest person I know." I reached over to the changing table and picked up the stack of unsent letters. My hands shook as I unfolded the top one. The handwriting was his careful, slightly slanted, the same hand that used to fix engines and sign report cards. Every single one began the same way. "Dear Erica, Dad is proud of you." Proud. I read them slowly one after another while he held Sophie and watched me. Some were only a few paragraphs. Others went on for pages, stories about his days at the shop, memories of my mother, fears he never voiced out loud. In one, he admitted he'd been hospitalized for 2 weeks and hadn't told me. In another, he described watching a news report about my unit and staying up all night praying. "I kept thinking I'd send them when the time was right," he said quietly. But the time was never right. I was scared. I folded the last letter carefully and placed it back in the box. Then I took his hand, calloused, scarred from years of work, and held it tight. "No more secrets, Dad. No more pretending. We've lost enough time already." He nodded, squeezing my hand back with surprising strength. No more secrets. We talked for hours after that. Sophie woke up and joined the conversation in her own way, babbling and reaching for both of us. For the first time in 20 years, the house didn't feel heavy with unspoken words. It felt like home. Later that evening, as I prepared dinner and Dad sat at the table with Sophie on his lap, he looked over at me with something like wonder in his eyes. "Never thought I'd get a second chance at this," he said. I smiled through fresh tears. Neither did I. 3 weeks had passed since that afternoon in the nursery. The leaves outside were beginning to turn, painting our quiet North Carolina neighborhood in shades of gold and crimson. Life had settled into a new rhythm, slower, gentler, full of small moments I had once taken for granted. Dad stayed longer than the original 2 weeks. Neither of us wanted to rush the fragile bridge we had finally built. Today was his 69th birthday. The house was fuller than it had been in years. Aunts, uncles, and cousins filled the living room and backyard. The smell of grilled burgers and Mom's old potato salad drifted through the open windows. Laughter echoed off the walls in a way that felt both foreign and wonderfully right. I stood in the kitchen doorway holding Sophie on my hip, watching my father hold court from his favorite armchair. He looked stronger these days, lighter somehow. The weight of all those unsent letters no longer bowed his shoulders quite so heavily. Uncle Ray, never one for subtlety, clapped Dad on the back with a loud laugh. "So, Frank, be honest now. You never really liked that Erica went into the army, right? Always figured you wanted her to stay close. Maybe marry a nice local boy and give you grandkids the old-fashioned way." The room quieted a little. Heads turned. I felt my stomach tighten out of old habit. Dad looked across the room and met my eyes. For a second I saw the old uncertainty flicker there, the fear of saying the wrong thing. Then he did something I'll never forget. He pushed himself up from the chair, standing tall despite the slight hitch in his step. "You know, Ray," he said, his voice carrying through the room with surprising strength. I used to think that, or at least I told myself I did. Spent a lot of years being a stubborn fool about it. He turned fully toward me. The entire family seemed to hold its breath. But I was wrong. Dead wrong. His eyes glistened. "Erica, you are the finest thing I've ever had a hand in bringing into this world. The strongest, bravest, most dedicated soldier and mother I've ever known. I'm prouder of you than I've ever been of anything in my life." Tears welled up instantly. I clutched Sophie a little tighter as murmurs rippled through the family. Dad reached into the breast pocket of his flannel shirt and pulled out a single worn envelope yellowed with age. The first letter he had ever written but never sent. His hands trembled only slightly as he unfolded it. "Erica." His voice cracked, but he pushed on, reading aloud the words he had kept hidden for so long. "Dad is proud of you. I've watched you march through every challenge life threw at you, and you never once backed down. You make me believe in something bigger than my own fears. I love you, kiddo. Always have. Always will." The room was completely silent except for the soft sound of Sophie's happy babbling. Then applause broke out, scattered at first, then thunderous. Family members wiped their eyes. Someone whistled. I crossed the room and wrapped my arms around my father right there in front of everyone. He hugged me back fiercely, one hand resting gently on Sophie's back. "I love you too, Dad," I whispered against his shoulder. "Thank you for finally letting me hear it." Later, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in oranges and pinks, we sat on the back porch, Dad, Sophie, and me. He held his granddaughter close, pointing out the fireflies beginning to dance in the yard. "Mr. Sullivan," I said softly. Using the old formal name I hadn't used since childhood, "I want you to know something. That baby monitor didn't just let me hear your secrets. It gave me back my father." He chuckled, a deep, warm sound. "And it gave this old man a chance to stop being such a damn coward." Sophie reached up and grabbed his nose with a delighted squeal. Dad laughed outright, the sound rich and full of life. I hope one day, he told her gently, bouncing her on his knee, "Your mama never has to wonder whether she's loved. Not for a single second. That's what Grandpa's gonna make sure of." I leaned my head against his shoulder, the evening breeze cool against my skin. The weight I had carried for 20 years was gone. In its place was something lighter, warmer, and infinitely more precious. I once believed the baby monitor revealed my father's hidden truth. But now I understand the most valuable thing I heard that day wasn't a secret at all. It was 20 years of love that had been quietly beating in his heart the entire time, waiting for the courage to finally speak. If this story touched something in your heart today, I'd love to know. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Which part hit you the hardest? Have you ever had a moment when you finally understood someone you thought you'd lost? Share it with us. Stories like these remind us that it's never too late to bridge the gaps we thought were permanent. We have so many more heartfelt journeys ready to share with you every single week, so hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Thank you for spending this time with us. Let's keep healing and listening to the voices that matter most.